if it's not black enough, it's too black. Like, so culturally you're not black enough and your skin is too black.
Hi, I'm Gracie Mercedes, and welcome back to Not Blank Enough, a podcast about everyday insecurities and triumph. In this episode, I'm talking with Maame-Yaa Aforo. The Black actress and filmmaker talks about growing up in Minnesota in predominantly white spaces, her journey from DC to LA, and her experience at an HBCU. I hope you enjoy this intimate conversation we titled Not Culturally Black Enough, and stay tuned for an afterthought from me after the interview. Hi, welcome to Not Blank Enough. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm excited to chat today.
You might be the only guest that I don't know in real life or haven't met in real life, at least at some point. I found you because of your short film, Brown Paper Pageant.
Yes.
I'm not even sure how I found it, but I do think we have a lot of friends in common. And I watched it and loved it. And I highly suggest anyone listening to this, go watch it. It's such a great, funny, poignant film about colorism and all kinds of things. It's just wonderful. And then you just launched a podcast as well.
Yes. My group, Obama's Other Daughters, we're an improv comedy group out of UCB, the non-existent, as of right now, UCB.
Right.
But yeah, we just launched our podcast, You Down, with Shondaland Audio. So that's been an exciting respite from the craziness of quarantine and everything else going on in the world.
I also started this podcast during quarantine. I think a lot of people are starting podcasts during quarantine. It's a good time to do it, I think.
Yeah, we need to be talking and staying sane.
Yeah, exactly. I want to hear more about Obama's Other Daughters, which is such a great title for an improv team, first of all. But tell me a little about yourself from like the very beginning. I want to know everything about you. And then we kind of touch base throughout, your life story about any moments in time where you felt not blank enough and what that blank was and whether or not you still feel it, if you have outgrown it, if it comes and goes. And yeah, that's basically all we do. Just chat.
Well, it was a cold and stormy September. I'm just kidding. September afternoon when I emerged. It was actually really hot. I don't know. I think that's just what people say. But yeah, I grew up in Minnesota. My parents are immigrants from Ghana, West Africa. I don't know why they chose to live in Minnesota.
Yeah, that's an interesting choice.
I think it's like the thing of just being happy to be anywhere in America.
Yeah.
So I'm glad it wasn't like Montana, or no offense, Montana people, somewhere that was even less popping than Minnesota.
Right.
But that was an interesting place to grow up as Black children for my brothers and I, because the concept of Minnesota niceness, and which, if you don't know what that is, it's basically passive aggressiveness masked with kindness. And that goes in so many layers, from race to your kid's on a basketball team with somebody and you decide to act out for crazy reasons, which brings me to one of the things I feel like I'm not enough because of where I grew up, how I talk, certain things that I like. I've been told that I wasn't Black enough at moments, which is like, look at me, I'm as Black as they come.
I mean, that's definitely, I think, a theme. We've talked about that before on this show with pretty much anyone who's been on the show who's been Black, and myself included, where, there's such a stereotype or a bias of how a Black person should, quote unquote, be, and what they should like and what they should sound like and talk like or whatever. So I totally get that. And I can imagine that being even more heightened in a place like Minnesota.
Yeah, it definitely was. There were, we don't have enough time to go through the amount of things that happened to me or my brothers growing up that when I think about them now, I'm like, oh, that was a little funky. But, we're in a place right now where things like that aren't being allowed as much as they were in the past. And I hope it progresses instead of going back to how it was before. Back to my life story. Where do I go? In high school, I was actually always like student council president and I was in show choir, which is like the nerdiest, coolest thing ever.
Wait, what's show choir?
Show choir is basically what the show Glee made into a serialized television show.
Okay.
But it's so much more dramatic and like political than they made it on Glee. Like there was just this hierarchy of, well, you've been in this choir for a year, so it's like a rite of passage to be in the next level of choir. And if you skipped one of them, parents were going to have a meeting with the choir director about why did this girl make it and my daughter didn't, like that type of stuff, which I think is hilarious. And there's like a whole cult following of show choir people all over the country.
Oh, wow.
Actually, Burbank High School has one of the best show choirs in the country.
Oh, really? Maybe that's what is Glee based on that? Wouldn't be surprised.
Well, one of the creators of Glee, Ian Brennan, went to a high school who had a show. We actually used to he's older than I am, but my school competed against his high school. So I think it was informed from his show choir experiences. So yeah, that show choir and sports and everything. I played softball my whole life and was a pitcher. That's another thing I wasn't enough. A little petite black girl in a city. Oh, I failed to mention the town I grew up in is called Coon Rapids, Minnesota.
Oh, wow.
It's a real place. I didn't know that Coon had the gravity that it has for a word until I got to college.
Was it because you started telling people where you were from and they were like looking at you funny?
They were like, wait, what? Yeah.
Oh, no.
I went to Spelman College in Atlanta.
Yeah.
That's a historically black college and the polar opposite of where I grew up. So, that was definitely I'm sure there are people who remember, if they remember anything about me, it's that I was from a place called Coon Rapids. Oh, with sports. And I've used it as kind of an allegory for life since then. But when I would play, or my team would play a new team of girls who had never played with me before or anything, when I would get up to bat, they would move in because I just looked like somebody, like one of those girls who just signed up because her friend signed up, not that I actually had my own athletic abilities. I would hit home runs every single time and hit it like to the fence. And I've slowed down, but I used to be very fast.
But that's awesome. So they underestimated you because of your size. You're petite.
Yeah. Not quite athletic enough, I guess. Like not quite. That niche of softball people is just a very specific type of person. And I feel like maybe they didn't think I belonged there, but I was beneficial to the people who knew that. Because I was also a pitcher, which was same thing of people underestimating
your arm,
that I could strike them out. Exactly.
Yeah.
Which, thank you, guys.
And in that case, it's like works to your advantage. So that's cool. That's fine.
Yeah. So after high school, I moved to Atlanta to go to college. Was very excited about moving to Atlanta because it was the height of snap music, and like Atlanta was really just everywhere in the world at that specific time. So that helped color my anticipation of what college would be. Yeah. But I also very much feared being told that I wasn't black enough, or that I talked like a white girl, or wasn't down enough, or didn't know enough.
Let's like talk about that a little bit more. So I'm assuming you wanted to go to Spelman because of the environment you came from. Were you the only black girl in your class, or were there other kids of color in class or not?
K through 8, yes, my family was the only black family. There were 2 kids who were adopted by white people that also at some point or another, went to my elementary and middle school. And then in high school, I mean, to say yes, there were black kids at my school, but there were like 10 or less out of, it's 99.5% white. And in those environments, anybody who's been in one of them, that a lot of times black people don't come together in environments like that, which I didn't like. I don't know why I even knew that I didn't like that at the time, but a friend and I started a diversity club for all the non-white students to be able to take an hour a week and just talk about different things that we were experiencing that the rest of the student body at large wasn't.
Right.
That was high school. Yeah. I forget what your question was.
No, I mean, I think I'm just like trying to unpack that life because it's crazy how isolating that can be if you're the only Black girl in a school, and even in high school being like, you must have felt it to the extent that you and your friends started this group for people of color so that you wouldn't feel that way. And it's funny because I think even when you go, like I grew up in New York City, and so my school was sort of diverse. I mean, it wasn't crazy diverse, but there were definitely other people who looked like me. And even in that environment, it can be segregated where like the Black girls hang out with the Black girls and the Latin girls hang out with the Latin girls and white girls. And I kind of fell somewhere in between as an Afro-Latina, and no one really understood what the hell I was. And so I get that, but I can imagine it's so much more heightened when you're literally like maybe the only Black girl, or maybe there's a couple other Black girls. So then when college rolls around, you're like, no, I don't want to go through that again. I want to be around people who look like me. But then at the same time feeling like, well, now I might still feel like I don't belong because I might not be quote unquote Black enough.
Right. If it's not Black enough, it's too Black. Like, so culturally you're not Black enough and your skin is too Black to be the kind of Black we like. That's like a theme. College was amazing. Shout out to Spelman. Definitely glad that I went there because it helped me form what identity I have as an African American or an African person in America, because most of my experience prior to that was from watching music videos or television. Like I always say Moesha was my best Black friend growing up because she was. Or I felt like, oh, she likes to read and journal and do these and has like crazy ideas of, takes something small and blows it out to it's the biggest deal in the world. And I felt that a lot. So I just felt like I needed to go to Spelman to understand what it means to be Black in America outside of my own isolated experiences. Culturally, my parents are not African American in the sense that they, basically in any sense, like the way that they operate is as Ghanaians who live in America, basically, to an extent.
Yeah, we should talk about that a little bit because I do find that so interesting because that is such a different experience. That's more like the immigrant experience. Your parents probably have more in common with my parents who immigrated here from the Dominican Republic because they are immigrants versus, an African American family who's been here for generations or are descendants of slaves from this country. It is a different experience. And I recently actually listened to another podcast on NPR, Code Switch, and they were talking about and they were talking about reparations and what that would mean and who would get those. They kind of went into the difference between African Americans and ethnic Blacks and how in this country, a lot of times ethnic Blacks, either Africans from Africa proper or from the islands, Black people from the islands, try to separate themselves from African Americans because there's also that thing, which is so shitty that we kind of are almost against each other as Black people. Yeah.
It's horrible. And I think, sadly, like many of those things, it stems from insecurity and like everybody trying to please the powers that be, which are usually white people. So proximity to whiteness and all of that. So like an African comes to America, they're going to get closer with Joe Schmo from their class because they think that his whiteness makes him all knowing or that they can learn something from him in a better way than they could from maybe their African American classmate, which that is a whole nother 5 hours of
whole nother conversation.
We can have that one next time. That's why I was so proud to go to Spelman and that it existed because it did help give me the chance to form that identity for myself. Yeah, did I already say that I felt there that I was like too Black in color but not Black enough culturally.
You kind of touched on it a little bit, but it's almost like you just gave me the perfect soundbite. But to say like too Black in color, but not Black enough culturally, that's some shit. Like, how did you deal with that?
I think I'm still dealing with it. And it was probably a way bigger deal than a couple years ago. But I definitely I wrote a lot. A lot of my writing revolves around feelings of being other. And what was weird in that space is I was leaving Minnesota thinking, in this space, I'm Black, and that's clearly the other. And then, like, in this bougie African-American environment. I'm accepted for certain reasons, for like the internships I get and all these things and being a part of a certain clique, and I'm a Delta, like things like that. But on the contrary, I was kind of an anomaly in being able to like be a mover and shaker on campus who looked like me, which is really nuts to me.
Is that why, tell me about Brown Paper Pageant and how that came to be, and was it inspired by your experience at Spelman?
So Brown Paper Pageant, when I was an assistant to two awesome mega producers for my first few years in LA. I knew what I wanted to do since I've been here, but I think there's this thing of things becoming realistic over time, whereas like you're like, I want to do this, but it's so far-fetched I could never. And then that happens, and then you're like, oh, well, then I can also do this and this and this and this.
Yeah.
So I really I just wanted to be known as a creative and for my voice, which who in LA doesn't want that, I guess. So every night after crazy hours, I would write. And so over time, I finished the feature Brown Paper Pageant script, which was really to kind of put all of the feelings that I felt in college sometimes that were new and intriguing to me, like that concept of being like, wait, so the Black people don't like my Blackness? What the heck?
Yeah.
Or not everyone, don't get me wrong, but like,
Right.
It's just a prevailing energy and a theme that you see. And it's just true. I've been gaslit in certain circumstances of people being like, oh, well, I don't know if that's true. Or like, well, I know a dark-skinned girl who did, and I'm like, you sound like a white person
Right.
telling me that racism, color, we don't see color.
Right.
That type of jargon.
Right.
Yeah, I figured out that I wanted to tell this story through the eyes of a pageant because that's such a huge deal at HBCUs, the pageantry. And like, there's a court for Miss Psychology Club and Miss
I didn't know that.
Future
Okay.
Dentist. Yeah, have like a Mr. Future Dentist and his attendants, like for homecoming, so for the parade, basically. And I think some of them do events and stuff throughout the year, but it's mostly like a glamour thing. But at Morehouse, Morehouse is the brother school of Spelman, and next door, there is just a history that the queens that they pick predominantly look a certain way. And I did that pageant and was like, I could place in this, but for some reason, I just don't believe that that's going to happen. Like, it would just be too much of a story jump. Even though there was a queen like a couple years prior who was dark skinned, who that's the example people like to throw in your face when you, well, what about this person? It's like, all right, let's keep going. Exactly. And so I just felt like, what is the story behind the story? Meaning, there's just like a consistency that you see when you look back in the history. And then when you walk on the campus and know what people's preferences are and all that kind of stuff. So I wrote that movie. It was sent around. People said they loved my writing and it's such an interesting topic, but nobody wanted to make it.
Right.
And I'm determined to get it made still. It was suggested that maybe I made a short to kind of show that there is interest in this topic and people are interested in exploring it more.
And then you get to show off your acting, directing, and writing.
Right. To also kind of introduce myself as an artist. Prior to that, I felt like I didn't fully come into myself as a creative and like owning that. I was like, I'm an assistant who wants to be a creative. Yeah. So I think that was definitely my like, hello, America.
Your coming out movie. But honestly, it was so good. I was so impressed by it, especially knowing that's your first film, because I mean, though I am like proud in one sense of my first film, there's so many things I see out in that first film. I'm like, oh God, I wish I could have taken it back and do it better, which I feel like I have corrected in my second short film that is now being sent out to festivals. Whereas when I saw your first film, I was like, oh, this girl did it. Like her first film is perfect because I thought it was so good. And I know how much goes into these short films and how much work it is and time and blood and sweat and tears, especially when you are the writer, director, and lead actor in it.
It is. And thank you for that. But I also watch it and cringe at certain moments that I'm like, oh, why did I? So,
Yeah.
we're in the same boat.
Yeah.
And I think that's great because that's why we do it, because the next one is always going to be better. And you learn so much every time you go through that process.
For sure. There's definitely the feeling of this second short film is definitely better than my first short film, but I still watch this second short film like, oh, I could do this better next time. Like you're never going to be happy, which I think is a good thing. I think is what keeps us going as creatives.
Right. Agreed.
So I love hearing this stuff about pageants. I had no idea, but I also, growing up in New York City, I went to Catholic school my whole life. For high school, the main one I went to was St. Michael Academy in Manhattan, which is Midtown Manhattan. It's now, I found out a couple of years ago, shut down. But, that school was all girls. The schools before, they're pretty small and we don't have sports really. I mean, some of them had teams. Like we had like a basketball team in the one school. And then in high school, we had a basketball team and a volleyball team. But it wasn't like we had football because we had no boys. So we didn't have homecomings. We had like a prom and that was about it. And then I went to NYU, which is like the lamest college when it comes to sports or anything like that. There's like, I think they have sororities, but I don't even know. So I never had that like homecoming fraternity sorority experience. And so every time, my only reference is like what I see on TV and movies.
Stomp the yard.
Yeah. And I just watched School Days for the first time, which reminded me of what you were talking about with the colorism stuff and your short film. Oh God, colorism is a crazy thing.
It is.
It's insidious and it's unfortunate and it happens in all kinds of ethnic groups. Mm-hmm. Like it happens among Africans, it happens definitely among Latinxes, it happens among
Asian, Indian. Yeah. Well, Asians are Indians, but you know what I mean? Yeah. Like wherever you break it down, it seems like in every community there's an aspect of it, which is also, I don't think that we can like erase colorism through a film or anything, but I do believe that bringing themes up and ideas up that people are either never exposed to or choose not to acknowledge does make progress in the issue, because it's like calling something out that people don't want to talk about necessarily.
Yeah, and I think it's good for the communities that experience it, but I also think it's good for people who are white or not people of color who see that and is like, we're not only getting shit from your side, right. We're getting shit within our own community. Yeah, it's like coming at us from everywhere. Okay, so then college. Okay, there's a great college experience. Great. So then when did you come to LA and when did you decide you want to do this? Because I did read that you went to school for political science, right? You wanted to work in politics. Yeah. Oh my God, tell me about that and how you transferred over to.
Well, so I was always class president in high school and stuff, which was really like me being like, I'm smart and everybody should know that you all voted for me and agreed that I should lead this class. I know that now. At the time, I don't know what I thought I was doing, but I loved it. It gave me great leadership skills from a young age. And I think it was my junior year, my counselor was like, you should apply to this program called Girls State. It's like basically like a government camp, which again, another very nerdy thing. Mm-hmm. High schools from all over every state send one or two they have boy state and girl state people to this camp, and you basically run a mock government at the city, state, and national level for a week. And it's so like people campaign and like have to do speeches. It's just like a little village of government camp for a week. From there, they choose two people to represent the state at Girls Nation, which is so two people from every state are sent to DC, boys and girls. Oh, wow. And to do that on the national level and like go through the process of Congress and Senate and whatever. So I was selected, voted to be the delegate from Minnesota when I was a junior. So I got to go to Washington, D.C. and meet George Bush, which was interesting. And all of my Congress people and senators have meetings with them, which that kind of made it like, oh, this is like maybe you should be a politician because you are passionate about social justice, and like that's something that I've always wanted to make sure is a part of my work and the things that I do. And my dad always wanted me to be a journalist, which is what I thought I was going to be. So when I got to college, political science was the obvious choice, thinking that I would be like a political journalist, like Soledad O'Brien type thing, and make documentaries too. And I studied abroad, actually, through NYU in Ghana.
Oh, cool.
A program which doesn't exist anymore. But Spelman students were allowed to do NYU study abroad programs.
Yeah.
So I was there for like 6 months with a bunch of NYU students, a couple Spelman students. And while there, I took a documentary class. And I just had never felt more passionate about – I'm a pretty passionate person anyway, but like – editing and like being like, oh, this should go here, and like it was just so fun to me. And I'm like, oh, this is what I have to do. Like I have to figure out how to be able to do this all the time because it's fun. So when I got back to school, I started PAing on random productions, like, you know, those movies that they made in Atlanta for less than $100,000 type thing. But gave me experience being a PA on a set like that. You're basically doing 5 people's job at one time. So I learned a lot and started building my resume that way. But because most of my resume was in politics, like I worked for Keith Ellison one summer, who's actually the attorney general overseeing George Floyd's case. But at the time, he was the first Black and first Muslim congressperson from Minnesota.
Yes.
Yeah, he's very dope and just a person in us, like the space that he has created that didn't exist before. It's so important. And that was really awesome to work in his office. And then with Department of Energy, like in their communications, because I kept lying to myself that I could merge an honorable mom and dad would be happy to say this out loud career with, with what I really wanted to do.
Yep. I get that
You can
on a
relate.
deep level. I didn't start pursuing acting until I was 30 because I was like, no, I have to have a real job. And so I thought I was going to be a journalist. I went to school for broadcast journalism.
Oh, cool.
And then I worked in production. And then I was like, I want to be an actor. And that kind of evolved into, I want to be an actor, writer, director, which is what I do now. But it was a lot of, let's try other things that, you know, guarantee money and guarantee success rather than the one thing I'm passionate about, so that I can relieve this like first generation guilt of like, you have to be successful.
You are preaching. Exactly that.
Yeah.
I think similarly, I felt documentary was some sort of melding of both, even though now I know, unfortunately, documentaries don't make a lot of money.
No.
And they're usually made out of passion and over years of time. I had gotten a job in the Senate Banking Committee, actually, after I graduated and moved to D.C. And, you know, was working there. I really couldn't do much because they were creating Dodd-Frank at the time, which was the bill that re-regulated financial institutions after the crash and all of that. So, like, as a fresh out of college person, they really were like, well, read the, like, I didn't have anything to do. And I would sit in on these meetings. And one day, because the Senate Banking Committee oversees the Mint, which creates money, and also housing and urban development, which I'm like, why are all 3 of those things in one department? But okay. Like give some of the money from the Mint to the people in the need it. But again, another conversation. Anyway, so we have a meeting one day with, I'll call it the copper lobby, meaning these people who mine copper or have companies that do something in relation to how pennies and Sacagawea coins are produced. Which, if I'm sure being from New York, you've put a $5 bill in the train before and gotten Sacagawea coins and been pissed because you don't. Who uses those?
Yeah, those giant dollar coins.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this meeting was about. Basically, there's this mandate. I don't remember the exact numbers, but the government is mandated to print X amount of Sacagawea coins every year. But they aren't being used in the cycle of money, buying, selling, whatever, refunds, besides really the train stations or like I got a Sacagawea coin at my friend's birthday party once. Like everyone got, you know, like they're more of a novelty than
right.
used currency. And so there was a scheme going on where people would buy like $10,000 on their credit card worth of coins, Sacagawea coins, and then take the coins to the bank and get the credit card points and like gain, like just racking up on credit card points. So this meeting was to discuss how do we figure out how to stop this, or do we need to print more coins because there are warehouses full of them in DC that nobody's using, and it's millions of dollars a year just literally just sitting in warehouses. And in that moment I was like, I can't do this. Like I cannot.
You're like, I can't do this for the rest of my life.
No, like I know the answer and I'm the newbie. Let's stop printing the coins and use that money somewhere else, right? That's a logical answer. But for whatever reason, it's like, oh, well, our business is going to, that's the lobby. They come in and tell you all the reasons you cannot do this because their company has been around for blah, blah years and blah, blah, you know, stories that matter to them. And and it was like, okay, we'll table this. I hope they figured it out by now. That was years ago.
Oh, I hate politics. Like, it's like, I hate politics, and I hate that, like, now more than ever, I have to know so much about it and be so much more involved than I want to be. And I am ashamed to admit that, but I'm also just being real. And like,
It's real.
It pisses me because things like that, it just pisses me off. I'm like, I don't understand why this is so complicated. Like, why is everything so complicated?
Right. Most political decisions could be handled by a preschooler from is this nice or is it not nice? That simple rule. So that kind of made me like, all right, you got to kick it into overdrive. How are we going to get out of how are we going to move to what you want to do? And I had a friend from high school who was working for Dr. Phil at the time in LA. And she was always like, you need to move to LA. Like, I just feel like you would do really well here. And I'm like, that I would never live in LA. Are you kidding me? Like, like all I thought was plastic surgery, and like I wouldn't be beautiful enough to fit in. Oh, there we go. Not quite LA enough. Beautiful enough to be in LA.
Yeah.
I ended up moving here, which was a crazy story of them being like, we love your resume. Like, if you are here, the job is yours. So I quit my job in the Senate. And by the time I had this follow-up call with this producer at Dr. Phil, she was like, oh, honey, I didn't mean that you should move here now.
What?
And I had like quit my job and but if you know anything about Dr. Phil,
That's so like the worst of LA though. That's so the stereotype of the worst of LA.
The flakiest of flakes. And I honestly don't think that woman remembers that that's what I mean by, she didn't remember that she even told me that. So, but you know what? Whatever your name is that I don't remember, thank you, because it got me here, okay? And I was just
everything happens for a reason.
Bible. Okay, my parents have always been like, if you wanted to go there, first generation, your parents are, I'm a baby forever, when I choose to be. But in decisions like that, I definitely value their opinions.
Yeah.
And I was like, if you help me for a month, I'll figure out how to make this work. And they were like, okay, which I was like, what? Thank them, because it's been history since then. From when I got here, I PA'd on some things for free, and through that met somebody who connected me to the job I had for like my first 2 years, which was a crazy job transcribing footage for a reality TV production company from 6 to 2 a.m. Again, it gave me consistent money for the first 2 years that I was here. And I would take class at the Groundlings during the day and, you know, act in a friend's sketch or do whatever. A couple music videos landed in my lap. Then, very weirdly, in my journalism, with my journalism hat on, a girl from Spelman asked me to interview, at the time, these two young creatives who made a sizzle called Dear White People on YouTube, and it was taking the world by storm because it was the first time people made this proof of concept. So I interviewed Justin Simeon and Lena Waithe about that for the Spelman paper while I lived in LA. It was over the phone, and subsequently when I was working I still had that job at night, but I was volunteering at Film Independent as an intern during the day just because I forget who I talked to that was like, that's just a good place to meet people and like learn, see films and be involved in that community. And at one of our events, I saw Alina Waith and I was like, oh my God, I interviewed her. I need to talk to her.
Yeah.
So I did. And she was like, you know what? Send me your resume. And the next day was like, do you want to interview to be Gina Prince Bythewood's assistant? And I was like, what? What? Love and Basketball is literally the first movie that like made me bawl tears because I was like, it's so beautiful, this love. And I'm like, hell yeah, I do. So I interviewed, got that job, and that sort of kind of put me in I was at the gate of the arena, I would say. I wasn't in there, but I was,
That's so great, though. That's like such, I mean, it really is. Everything happens for a reason. Everything was put in place in front of you the way it was supposed to be put in place in front of you.
Totally. And to this day, to this afternoon even, things happen. Like for anybody who is like discouraged in navigating this crazy business, unfortunately, the truth of it is you cannot force anything. Like you do what you do and do it well, and people will find you that need to find you. That's the only way, or that's the best way to work.
Yeah, and I wish I knew that sooner because I feel like I finally accepted that. And it took a while. I finally accepted that. But I just remember when I first came to LA being so desperate to work as an actor, to get auditions, to have the quote unquote right agent. And it wasn't until 6 or 7 years later when I let all that shit go and just started focusing on making my own stuff, writing my own short films, directing and making things, writing my first pilot, that things literally came to me. Like,
wow.
It is part, what is that saying about opportunity is?
Preparation plus opportunity equals success.
That's it. Preparation plus opportunity equals success. And it is like, having that focus to have that spec script ready or have that short film to show them or have that resume to show them, because then when it comes and you have that, that's how you succeed and get the job and get the work. And for me, it's a similar situation where I had so many odd jobs. I tried so many different things. I did a bazillion and one side hustles so that I didn't have to wait tables, so that I can do what I wanted to do and not be miserable waiting tables. And all that X, Y, and Z added up to where I am now, which, I'm still, it's not like I'm this like award-winning famous.
You're popping though. Everybody just needs to know. The world needs to know.
No, but it's like, it just finally feels, like, I belong here and I'm not there yet, but I'm going to get there. And it feels like all possible. Whereas 5 or 6 years ago, I was like, what am I doing? Like, I'm going to be broke forever.
Seriously. I am right there with you because it is seemingly impossible. But when you realize all that coffee and blah, blah, blah and networking stuff, yes, that does play a role in it, but not as big of a role as if you have an awesome script that you spent time writing. I just feel like that could save so many people so much anxiety and stress if they really owned that and knew that it wasn't somebody trying to keep you out of the game. Because I feel like when people say that, they're like, well, write a script. And you're like, okay, but can't you just introduce me to everybody that I need to know so I can be in the game? Like, no, it doesn't work like that.
And I do find people don't want to do the work. It's funny, like since I got that the writing job I did last year on Perfect Harmony, that opened up a lot of opportunity for me. And then, after that, I got a lot of people asking me like, how do I do it? How do I do it? How do I do it? And I'm like, I don't know how you do. Like, I'm like, I don't even know how I did it. Like, I just know that I wrote this script and then someone who's like a friend of a friend was like, do you have a script? Because this woman's looking for a writer. And it just kind of all fell into place. But again, it was after years of like hard work. And also I think making a conscious decision at some point in my life where I was like, and I feel like this was like, 5 or 6 years ago, where I was like, you know what? I love this fucking business and I'm going to work in this business as an actor, as a writer, as a director, as a combination of all three for the rest of my life. And just accepting that and just being like, whatever it takes, I'm going to do it and I'm going to work in this business. And then once you do that, then it feels like at least for me, it felt like, oh, I can settle into this. And there's no rush. There's no finish line. Like things will come when they come and they'll go away and then they'll come back. And that's just, part of this business.
There's this speech when you were talking about being desperate. I can totally relate. I feel like I definitely was. I feel like at Spelman, you're taught this is how you network. You wear a suit and you go up to somebody after they speak at an event and introduce yourself and shake their hand and get their email and send a follow-up email. And, like that's the way to run your business. At a certain point, I watched the speech Ava DuVernay gave. I believe it was when she won her first Spirit Award, about how because she was a publicist in Hollywood for like 20 years. So the speech by Ava DuVernay, she basically was saying that for 20 years, she really wanted to always do what she is doing right now, which is be the mind behind the projects, but she was publicizing other people's projects. And then also like wearing what she called a cloak of desperation. And people can smell that cloak of desperation because it's like, it's a posture and an unassuredness that you have with yourself, which I totally have rolled like that before. So I knew exactly what she was talking about, of thinking you need to like lower yourself or something to be accepted. Where no, you come as your full self all the time and you let people know what you want to do and you do it. So you don't say, I want to be a writer. And they're like, oh, send me one of your scripts. And you're about to sit down and write the script today. Like it doesn't work like that. You have to put in time to be able to see the results. And even with Brown Paper Pageant as a short film, I finished that last year and was only able to release it this year because of so many other reasons. But again, perfect timing for it to come out when it did. But I definitely had to wait to get the results of my hard work, which was very annoying to me to be like, but I should be directing music videos and everything, but nobody's seen your work yet. So how are you going to do that?
Exactly. Yeah. And it's all timing and it'll come when it's supposed to come kind of thing. It's like, it's crazy. And I still have to pull myself out of thinking the worst.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
this is the
never
positive.
gonna work again.
I know.
But, it's just part of the game. So how did you get into comedy?
Growing up, I feel like I was always, the way my mind works is just like, what if, like, that's me and my friends, like, oh my God, what if that lady just, like, what we're at the store, like, or what if I just did this right now in the aisle? And I would always have people tell me, like, you're the funniest girl I've ever met, or like, you're just so funny. And I didn't think that meant anything at the time. But after the decision of I'm leaving DC, I feel like I can help tell stories that influence change more than sitting around talking about Sacagawea coins. I really was like, okay, well, I'm in LA. I know I grew up watching Saturday Night Live and Mad TV every Saturday, and like that's informs a huge part of my sense of humor and what I think is funny. Why don't I try to go to one of these comedy schools? And I was so nervous, and you have to audition at the Groundlings to get into the first class, or you can like take 2 classes to get into the program. And I auditioned and got in the first time, and I was like, oh, I don't even know what I'm doing. And like, but I did know what I was doing. I didn't know that I did. Comedy is a rhythm and a mathematics and a feeling that if you have it, you have it. And sometimes you can learn it, but you can kind of tell when it's been artificially, when there's like too much going on behind it that's not real. So I started at the Groundlings, was there for like 5 years, training. And that was an interesting experience because what's coming out now is the truth that a lot of those comedy institutions we'll say, hopefully they are changing like they say they are. Yeah. But just racist in some of their practices, from who they choose to be in the company to not having a person of color in the company for like decades. Just so much. There's a lot you can read about that out there right now.
Yeah, for sure. I've had similar conversations with, Tawny Newsome was I'm like, I don't know when this is going to be released. So she was either on it or was going to be on our show. Yeah, and she comes from Second City. And then I went through the program at Iowa West and was on a Herald team there. And then I went through the program at UCB, and then after that was like, I think I'm done with improv for a while.
Wow.
But yeah, I think we all have, those environments are mostly white people and a lot of times mostly male whites and very little diversity on or off the stage or even in the classroom. So I totally get that.
So at a certain point at the Groundlings, I didn't make it into the company, which definitely shot my ego and made me think I was horrible and should quit and all that stuff. So at that point, I sort of was like, well, I'm going to try to work behind the scenes. I know that I'm really good at this. I was brought on to help produce this African film. I could do a whole episode on this, so I'll try to keep it short. This African film, this woman reached out to me who was a friend of a family friend. And long story short, I was so, again, when I'm working, I'm like all in. Like I was working on it every day. We were shooting in London and Nigeria. She wanted this actor. I helped get the actor. Like I was like, oh, I'm thriving. I get to London and the second day she was like, I don't have any more money. And I was like, what? Lady?
No.
She was swiping her credit card.
Oh no.
For everything until she couldn't anymore. And in that moment, this person is twice my age and I had to be the one to tell the crew, we got it. People who passed up legit BBC work to work on this film. And she's just like, well, I'm going to pray about, and I'm like, okay, baby, there's a time to pray and there's a time
to pay.
Thank you. Thank you. That's what I meant. So that was really crazy and a learning experience in how I was going to choose who I worked with going forward, which I'm still figuring that out now. But when I got back, I joined another improv team because I had been on some little teams here and there where I was the only Black person most of the time, except for one, Julian Gant, who is like the poster child of the Groundlings now. And he's about to have a show on CBS. He's a Cheez-Its guy. He was on my team and he's hilarious and an awesome person. But other than that, there wasn't a lot of diversity. So somebody invited me to be on a diverse team when I got back from London. And I was like, sure. And at the same time, I got my job working for Seth Gordon as his assistant. And he has an overall with Sony TV. So I was working on the end of Baywatch, which he directed, and then Atypical, which is on Netflix, and The Good Doctor were a part of the things I helped with during my time there. And so, yeah, I feel like that job was really my crash course in development and seeing what people are buying and like what kind, one, definitely how to tell a story and knowing good story from looking at it and reading it and knowing that these plot points are met and whatever structurally, which I'm really grateful for because I don't know where else I could get that. So that job taught me a lot about the business as far as on the page. Yeah. Which is something that isn't like you can teach it to a degree, but it's a feeling and like a knowing, like a radar.
Usually, I think for most things that have to do with like film and TV, the best experience is that hands-on experience. Like I never went to film school, and I'm still learning all the time. But it's just being on sets and being in edit rooms and being in writers' rooms and production. It just all that stuff is so helpful and so important. I think if you're going to work in this business.
Agreed. So at that time, I was on this team, and we did Obama's Other Daughter's show that they hosted at UCB. And I was like, oh my gosh, doing improv with Black women, like what a fantasy, a wet dream like of improv. So subsequently, they lost some people on the team and asked me to join. It was really crazy. Like the third show that I did with them, Lucia Agnello and Paul Downs were in the audience, two of the creators of Broad City. And they were like, hey, do you guys want to hang out? Like, we think you need a show and we want to help you make it. So through that, the group was ushered into getting our agent, UTA, as a group and individually, which, again, something that I was like, in 10 years, maybe I could get that type of agent. Yep. Or, somebody like that to even consider my work. Yep. So that was cool. And because I had written Brown Paper Pageant, that ushered me into getting my own manager and kind of building Obama's Other Daughters as its own entity, and then me starting to develop myself as a creative. And so I'm still on that journey now, and it's really awesome.
It's incredible.
When I think back and like saying it like that, it was just very the whole process, I could not tell you that I would end up where I am now, but it all makes sense when I look back because everything I have done before has informed what I did next. And especially with improv.
No, I just love hearing your story because I feel so close to it. I feel my story very much parallels your story, and I feel like it's so good for women, especially women of color, to hear these stories because I do think it's right now more than ever is the time where these big agencies and agencies in general are looking to work with diverse voices and female voices, and we want new POVs. And so if you're out there and you're creating your stuff and you're making your stuff, that's how this shit happens. That's how you end up with these amazing agents and people behind you, not because you're trying to get an agent and you're doing these like mailings that cost $1 bazillion and take up a lot of time and usually end up in the garbage. But instead you're putting that, which I did. I've been guilty of doing that.
Yeah. Well, that's what they tell you should do.
And it's like, no, use that time, energy, money to fucking make stuff, to show yourself as an actor, to show yourself as a writer, as a director, and it will get their attention. It might take time. It's not going to happen overnight, but it will get people's, attention if it's quality work with a unique point of view. So you have been such a great guest and so interesting.
I'm like, we need to hang out after this so I can hear your side.
I know, but the crazy, I love this, but also like, I feel like I'm usually way better at like making my guests talk about they're not blank enough. And we didn't really land on anything with you. And I want to try to land on something with you before we end the episode, just to kind of stick to the theme of the show.
Yeah, why not? That makes sense.
But you have such an interesting life and story that it's been so great thus far. Yeah, when you came into this, did you have an idea of what your not blank enough was?
I did, and now I can't remember what it was. Maybe because this conversation has changed a little bit. But I definitely think it could be I'm not black enough. I'm not the right kind of beautiful enough. I'm not the right kind of funny enough.
Oh, yes. I think you did mention to me feeling not funny enough in an email. And I totally see that. I do think that we did talk about the not black enough thing probably the most. We did have an episode called that, but for different reasons. So I'm wondering if there's something more specific than that in your case. The other one was with my friend Matt, who's biracial. Because he's lighter skin and looks a certain way, he got kind of the opposite of you, where it's like you're not black enough in the sense that literally the color of your skin isn't black enough, and because you're lighter you have these advantages, and for you it's interesting. Right. It's almost the reverse. It's like your skin is darker, but they don't think personality wise or culturally you're black enough.
So maybe it's not culturally black enough.
Well, I'm good with that. Thank you so much. Just tell us where we can find you and what to look out for.
My social media handle is @YaaMaams, YaaMaams. So you can connect with me there and see some of my work. Yeah, that's the best way to reach me. And Obama's Other Daughters, our podcast, You Down. You can listen to it anywhere. And also you can follow us on Instagram @Obama's Other Daughters.
Thank you, Maame-Yaa. It was great talking to you.
Thanks, Gracie.
Okay, so today's afterthought is expanding on the idea of how to quote unquote make it in Hollywood. Obviously, what Maame-Yaa and I spoke about was not knowing the answer to that, and that there isn't just one path on how to quote unquote make it. And neither of us feel like we're there yet, but we both feel like things are looking up or promising, or that maybe we're on a path to get there. So now I'll just speak for myself and expand on what I said in the interview. Yeah, I think it was the day that I decided, like, this is what I'm going to do for a living and I'm never going to give up. And then there isn't a plan B, is when things started to really open up for me. And I feel like now more than ever, it's really important for women and people of color to hear this because, we talk about it all the time. Representation matters. And sometimes it's hard to feel like you can work in this industry because you don't see people like you really succeeding. That is definitely changing. And there are definitely people out there, women of color in particular, that I get to look up to who are succeeding as actors, writers, producers, directors. But I think the most important thing is if you want to work in this industry, to really just commit to it, to really do the work and worry less about getting that great agent or making quote unquote connections, and more just focus on making your own work. And I know this is all easier said than done. It took me a long time to get to this place. I'm trying to save those out there who might want to do this, the heartache, the frustration of going through pursuing this career, thinking like it's all about who represents me or it's all about who I know. Yes, that stuff definitely helps, but to get to that point, you really need to just put in the work. And I'm still figuring it out. I by no means know how Hollywood works. I don't think anyone knows how Hollywood really works. And I do think everyone has a different path. No one gets to be successful in this industry the same exact way. People get into it in so many ways, shapes, and forms. I think that's part of the fun of it. And I think that's part of what makes it so unique. I just want to encourage anyone who wants to be an actor, writer, director, producer to really, find your tribe, make stuff with people who are like-minded. Make stuff with people who want to work as hard as you. Don't have a backup plan. Like really just work your ass off to do it. And that's only really possible if you really love it. This is not a career to just try for a year. This is something you really have to love and commit to. If you are a creative out there working to make your dreams come true, please reach out to me, whether it's through a comment or DM at NotBlankEnoughPod. I would love to hear from you. Thanks so much for listening, and don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Until next time, know that you are more than enough. Check the show notes for links and info about today's guest. Follow us on Instagram at NotBlankEnoughPod. This episode was produced during the COVID-19 pandemic of 2020 and recorded remotely. Our show today was produced by Gracie Mercedes and Dave Hill and edited by Douglas Sarine and Colleen Beasley. Not Blank Enough is a Gumption Pictures production.